It all started as a bright, peaceful morning in our quiet neighborhood park. Families were setting up lawn chairs, veterans were polishing their medals, and the American flags were gently waving in the breeze. We were preparing for a very special event, a veteran honor ceremony to recognize the brave men and women who've served our country. Everything was going smoothly until she showed up. You know the type, loud, entitled, and ready to pick a fight over just about anything. Yep, a full-blown Karen moment was brewing, and none of us saw it coming. Out of nowhere, she marched across the grass in her red shirt, fuming, and demanded to know why there were so many people on what she claimed was her side of the neighborhood. She wasn't interested in listening, and before we could explain anything, she started yelling about how we were violating some made-up guest limit rule. That's right, she tried to fine me for having too many guests at a public park. The irony. She didn't even bother to ask what the gathering was for. It wasn't a party. It wasn't a picnic. It was a heartfelt ceremony to honor veterans, including my father, who was being recognized that day. But what happened next was something I'll never forget. Her tone, her attitude, and her complete lack of respect didn't go unnoticed, especially by the man she picked a fight with, a decorated Army officer standing just a few feet away. And let's just say he wasn't about to stay silent. What he said and how the crowd reacted changed the entire mood of the day. But before I get into that, you need to hear exactly how she made things worse, because the moment that followed left everyone in shock. So there we were, halfway through setting up the chairs and photo boards, with families quietly chatting, and veterans in uniform sharing old stories, when this woman just exploded. She didn't ask, didn't observe, didn't even pause to take in the moment. Instead, she walked right up to me and started going off about unauthorized gatherings and how I was disturbing the peace. I tried to stay calm and explain it was a public ceremony, that we had city approval, and that it was a Veterans Honor event. But she wasn't hearing any of it. Her voice kept rising, and soon everyone nearby could hear her rant. She kept pointing at the number of people, saying, "This is way over the limit for neighborhood gatherings," and then pulled out her phone like she was about to call someone important. Honestly, I thought she might just be bluffing, but then she said something that really threw me. "I'm part of the HOA board," she snapped. "You're in violation, and I'm filing a report." I didn't even know we had an HOA enforcement for public parks. That's when it clicked. She had no idea what the event was even about, right? Then, one of the veterans, a high-ranking officer in full uniform, stepped forward. He had been standing nearby, quiet, but clearly watching the whole thing unfold. He was calm, respectful, but you could feel the energy shift as soon as he walked up. Karen didn't recognize him or his uniform, and she actually pointed her finger at him next, accusing him of organizing the illegal event. You could hear people gasping. That moment felt like everything was hanging in the air. The officer took a breath, squared his shoulders, and looked her dead in the eyes. And what he said next, well, it changed everything. The officer stood tall, calm as ever, and said, "Ma'am, this is a public event approved by the city to honor our veterans. I suggest you show some respect." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the kind that makes everyone stop and listen. Karen, clearly not used to being challenged, didn't back down. She crossed her arms, looked him up and down like he was some random guy in a costume, and said, "I don't care what kind of costume that is. You're still not above the rules." You could almost feel the collective breath of the crowd get caught in their throats. What made it worse was that she truly didn't recognize who she was speaking to. This man wasn't just a decorated veteran. He was a retired colonel with multiple honors, a local hero, and someone deeply respected by the community. A few people in the crowd started murmuring, trying to clue her in. But she was locked and completely convinced she was in the right. And now, it wasn't just about me or the number of guests. She had made it personal. Meanwhile, a few of the veterans' families were visibly upset. One older woman, whose husband was being honored that day, turned to me with tears in her eyes. "This day was supposed to mean something," she whispered. I felt awful, not just because of the scene Karen was causing, but because this moment was supposed to be peaceful, reflective, full of gratitude. As the argument dragged on, another layer of tension started to form. A couple of neighbors came over, quietly siding with Karen. I overheard one say, "She's technically not wrong if it's too many people." That hit hard. This wasn't just about one entitled woman anymore. Now the neighborhood itself was starting to divide. As more people gathered around, the atmosphere shifted from peaceful to heavy with tension. What started as a quiet veterans honor ceremony had turned into something that felt like a neighborhood standoff. Karen wasn't backing down. She was now on her phone, snapping pictures of the crowd, mumbling something about reporting us to the city council. A few of her usual supporters, neighbors who'd had issues with community events before, stood behind her, nodding like she was doing something noble. The veterans remained calm, but you could see the frustration building in their eyes. Most of them had seen real conflict, real sacrifice. Now they were being treated like a nuisance in their own hometown. The retired colonel stood firm, still trying to de-escalate, but his voice was losing ground to Karen's rising volume. She accused him of intimidation, even though he hadn't raised his voice once. Then something unexpected happened. One of the younger veterans, probably in his early 30s, stepped forward. He wasn't part of the official ceremony, but had shown up to support his grandfather. You could tell he was trying to stay calm. But seeing this woman disrespect not just the ceremony, but the people who had served clearly hit a nerve. "Ma'am," he said, voice shaking slightly, "you're not just being rude. You're dishonoring every person here who put their life on the line." Instead of listening, Karen snapped, "Oh please, playing soldier doesn't give you the right to break rules." That's when everything truly shifted. The crowd, which had stayed mostly quiet, started to speak up. You could hear people saying, "Enough is enough, and this is disgraceful." Some guests who didn't even know each other were now stepping forward, defending the veterans. The tension was thick, and it felt like everything was building to one breaking point. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get any more intense, another twist came out of nowhere. As people started voicing their frustration and Karen tried to talk over them, a city parks official arrived on the scene. We hadn't expected him until later, but someone must have tipped him off early, probably Karen. She rushed toward him like she had just won a prize. "There you are," she said loudly. "I've been reporting this illegal gathering for over 30 minutes. I need you to find them and shut this down immediately." The entire crowd fell silent. All eyes turned to the official, who looked around, visibly surprised by the scene in front of him. He saw the flags, the uniformed veterans, the elderly guests, and then the small knot of angry neighbors, led by Karen. For a second, no one said a word. The official looked down at his clipboard, then back at Karen. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I was sent here to oversee the permit for a veteran honor ceremony. Is this not the event in question?" Karen's face went pale. You could actually see her processing what she'd just done. But before anyone could speak, she doubled down. "I can't be right," she insisted, her voice cracking slightly. "They said it was just a small event, not this parade-level crowd. They're violating crowd limits. This isn't safe." Now the veterans and their families were truly upset, not yelling, but heartbroken. One of the older men leaned over to his wife and whispered, "I fought harder for less than this." You could see how much it hurt him that his own community was treating him like an inconvenience. And the city official, caught in the middle, started flipping through his notes because suddenly, Karen wasn't the only one questioning the rules. The tension was at its peak. The city official scanned the permit paperwork while the crowd stood frozen, veterans and families holding their breath. Karen stood smugly beside him, arms crossed, convinced she'd exposed some major violation. Then, the official looked up and spoke clearly for everyone to hear. The event is fully approved. The guest limit only applies to private events, not public ceremonies. This is a city-recognized veteran honor ceremony. No violations here. A wave of relief swept through the crowd. People clapped. Some even cheered softly. Karen's expression twisted from confidence to disbelief, then to quiet panic. But instead of apologizing, she muttered something about filing a formal complaint anyway and turned to leave. That could have been the end of it. But then came the twist none of us saw coming as she walked away. One of the elderly veterans, who had been sitting quietly near the front, called out to her. His voice was shaky but firm. "Ma'am," he said, "you don't remember me, do you?" Karen paused, confused. He stood up slowly, adjusting the medals on his jacket. 30 years ago, I was your high school principal. You once said I was too strict when I made you apologize to a teacher you yelled at." Karen froze. The color drained from her face. A few people in the crowd gasped. The moment was surreal. Suddenly, the entire situation made more sense. The entitlement, the refusal to back down, the way she talked to people like she owned the place. She had always been like this. She didn't say a word, just turned away, fast, and kept walking quieter this time. The crowd slowly turned back toward the ceremony. The noise faded. And finally, we could begin the day the right way, with respect, unity, and a moment of silence for those who had truly earned it. After Karen disappeared down the sidewalk, the air felt lighter. People started talking again, this time in softer, more grateful tones. Chairs were readjusted. Kids settled back down beside their grandparents. And the ceremony finally began nearly an hour late, but with a deeper meaning now. The speaker stepped up to the podium and began by thanking everyone, especially the veterans, not just for their service, but for their patience and grace that morning. The colonel gave a short but powerful speech about community, respect, and remembering. The sacrifices made so that we could all enjoy freedoms like gathering peacefully. The younger veteran who had stepped in earlier stood with his grandfather, and they were both honored with heartfelt applause. A few people who had initially sided with Karen quietly came back and sat with the rest of the crowd. No words were exchanged, but their presence said enough. Later, as we were packing up, that same city official approached me. He apologized for the disruption and even offered to personally file a statement confirming that everything had been within the rules. He said, "Some people just need to be reminded that honoring service doesn't come with a crowd limit." I nodded, thankful not just for his words, but for how the entire community eventually came together. Looking back, the incident with Karen became more than just a dramatic moment. It reminded us why we were there in the first place. Not just to celebrate veterans, but to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. The true power of that day wasn't just in the flags or the uniforms, but in how a divided crowd found its way back to unity. Sometimes, respect doesn't have to be demanded, just needs to be remembered.